Hello. Today we're going to talk about objects in PHP. So this is an introduction to objects, but it's not an introduction to PHP. So if you are just getting started with PHP, you could probably choose a better place to get started. But if you are familiar with the basic syntax of PHP, then this should probably meet your needs. If you are familiar with objects, but just not so familiar with them in PHP, this is going to be good for you. I have all kinds of introductory videos on PHP, which might be a better place for some folks to start, but if you want a basic introduction to objects in PHP, you're in the right place. Alright, so this is the first in a series of videos. I'm trying to make a bunch of bite-sized videos on objects. I'm not going super in-depth, but I think this is going to serve purpose of introducing you to the syntax that you need to know. So, the first thing we're going to talk about today when we talk about objects are classes. So, a class is what you call the definition for an object. So you create objects by defining a class. In terms of PHP, it's just keyword class. The syntax for creating a class is very simple. It's just class and then the name of the class. When you create an instance of a class, that's called instantiation. And you notice I've already gone back and forth between objects and classes. So class is what you call the definition for an object. So they are related. Classes or objects contain two things. They contain properties and methods. I will talk about what those are on the next step. So, step one to creating a class or an object, defining an object, is the planning phase. Planning is that thing that goes overlooked for a lot of things. When you're doing something of medium complexity or anything beyond a couple lines, I can't emphasize enough how good of an investment of your time it would be to get out a piece of paper and start scratching things out. So when we say defining the interface for a class, we're talking about that very far off view of what is this class, what's this object going to look like. So an object is a collection of related properties and methods. So let's explain those things. Properties are like, they're basically variables that belong to an object. And methods are the functions that belong to an object. The functions work with the properties. So let's say we're going to create a player object, and I'm going to write this code soon enough. I know that you want to learn some PHP, and we're sitting here looking at a PowerPoint presentation right now, but that's how this has to start. I need to introduce syntax to you, and let's get a game plan together. So let's say we're going to make a player object. So what are some attributes of a player? So I came up with a few. I mean, I could come up with a million. It completely depends on context. So let's say every player has something like a name and a level, HP, that's going to be hit points. Maybe they have an attack rating. Maybe they have magic. I don't know what this is. I don't know what it is. Right? Maybe this is a cooking video game. I don't know what they have. They have whatever you decide they have. I could come up with a whole bunch of different attributes, and so those are called properties. The ones in green are the ones I'm going to run with because I thought they were going to be the easiest ones to manipulate. And like I said, I'm trying to keep this short and sweet. I very much encourage you to make this more interesting, right? Like maybe kind of dig into random numbers and make this more functional for yourself. But for me, I'm trying to make it as easy as I can to demonstrate. So I'm going to build a player with an HP, a name, and a level. The properties are kind of the easier part, I think, because when you think about an object, you're probably defining the properties. The more interesting part is the methods, and most of these videos are going to be about methods. Some methods are interesting, some are not interesting. We're going to spend a lot of time on the not so interesting methods because they end up being the more essential ones. So what are some things a player can do? So things a player could probably do is maybe like attack, maybe move, eat, talk. Right? It all depends on what the heck the game is. The ones I'm going to run with are going to be eat and talk, so I'll just tell you what my plan is for those now and why I chose them. I'm saying eat is a good one because when you eat something, I'm just going to like add something to HP. So that's going to be a good example of a method that manipulates one of these properties. And I always go with talk when I'm doing a simple object because my talk is basically just a glorified hello world function. So it allows us to test something and it produces output even though it doesn't do anything. Move certainly would be something that a player could do, but I don't want to get into that because then we have to start asking questions like, is this 2 dimensions or 3 dimensions? If it's 2 dimensions, we're going to have X and Y's. If it's 3, there's going to be Z's. You see like how when you start thinking about defining the interface, these things oftentimes start to get way more complicated. Sometimes when you start to think about those methods, you start to realize how many properties you might need to do that right, and you might start to think about how complex some of these interactions might be, and you might decide to make some changes. So at this point, I'm going to go create a class for player. This is going to be laughably simple because I can't really do anything more than this until I introduce a little bit more. But if I'm going to make a player class, I'm just going to jump into PHP, keyword class, and then the name of my class. That's it. I always try and comment out my curly braces, my closing curly braces, so I'll just say player class. That's the class. I can't do anything, right? I said we're going to have properties and we're going to have methods, but I can't do those yet. This doesn't produce anything, so let me go save it. File, save as. Like I said, if you're just getting started with PHP, this is a bad place to be, because you don't know how to do these things that I'm talking about. So this is going to be called class.player.php. So this, I have XAMPP running. Like I said, this is not a good introduction video. I was going to test it, but I'm not going to test it because I know it doesn't do anything. That's it. That's a player class, right? It doesn't do anything, but I guess it's a player class. So I wasn't sure if we'd have enough time to define any properties here, but I think we do. So let's head on to the next slide, which is defining properties. So this step one was just planning. I mean, I created a class, but as you saw, it was basically empty. I could have just done nothing and been pretty much in the same spot. Let's create those properties. So we talked about properties. Properties are the variables that belong to a class. There's not a whole lot to getting started with creating properties, but before we do that, I have to explain what access modifiers are. So classes and objects are very much about interrelated parts of a program, and so these access modifiers define the scope of those properties. So if something is public, then that property can be accessed from anywhere in the program. If something's private, it can only be accessed from inside the class itself. And if something is declared as protected, that means it can only be accessed by subclasses or children. This has to do with the magic word inheritance. I don't plan on getting into inheritance. It's interesting and it's cool, but we're not doing anything with that. So let's just say we got public and private for today. I'm going to declare things to be private just because it makes things more interesting. Public would be easier, but we're going to do private. So I'm going to do HP, name, and level. So here's our class definition. So the first thing you generally do is define those properties, and this will take about 1 minute. So access modifier private. And I said we were going to do name. Well, okay, so if you're declaring a variable in PHP, it's $name. Right? We don't assign it a value. That's not how you do this. You're going to assign the value to that using a special function called a constructor. I'm just declaring the properties. Like I said, this is easy. All right, so another one's going to be HP. And another one was going to be level. There you go. You have now created the properties for the object. Now, the best plans oftentimes start falling apart real quick. Like oftentimes you start to realize, oh gosh, I need more properties, or I want to change the ways things are organized, and that's fine. But in the beginning, right, just getting started with those properties is pretty simple. You could declare them just like you would any other variable. You just got to give them an access modifier, and we'll deal with initializing them later on. So in the next video, we will start getting into the methods, which are the functionalities of an object, and that's where all the interesting things starts to happen. This is probably pretty disappointing if you watched for 9 minutes and all you got is this, but that's where it starts. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video when we get started with methods.